When the bodies of the passengers on Flight 753 were taken to the morgue, everything indicated that they were dead. They were not breathing, their hearts produced no detectable pulse, and none of them responded to stimuli. However, while the doctors tried to discover what had happened inside the plane, something continued moving beneath the victim's skin. Extremely thin organisms had already entered their circulatory systems. From there, they began spreading through the tissues, altering the organs, and slowly reconstructing their throats. Approximately 1 day later, the corpses rose again. They still had the passengers' faces. Some remembered who they were, where they lived, and how to return to their families. But the people who had boarded that plane no longer truly controlled their bodies. They now belonged to a colony of parasites, and whatever walked using their memories and appearance was a strigoi. The vampires of the strain are not corpses resurrected through a pact with the devil, nor are they humans condemned to drink blood to preserve their immortality. They are organisms reconstructed from within by a parasitic infection capable of transforming virtually their entire anatomy. Their red blood disappears, the organs that are no longer useful atrophy, and a retractable structure almost 2 meters long grows inside the throat. In addition, every infected person becomes mentally connected to the creature that originated their particular strain of infection. Therefore, a stragoi is not merely an individual predator, but also an eye, an ear, and an extension of a much older collective intelligence that we will later come to know as the Ancients. One of them in particular will be the most important in this story, the creature known as the Master. So in this video, we are going to explain what happens when a person transforms into a strigoi, how the worms that cause the infection work, how long the process takes, what changes the body undergoes, and why these creatures become far more dangerous when they operate as part of a hive mind. We will also examine their different classes, abilities, weaknesses, and the true origin of a condition that spreads like a disease, despite not having arisen through any natural process. First of all, there are 2 main ways to become a strigoi. The first occurs through the stinger. Unlike traditional vampires, these creatures do not rely on 2 large fangs to open their victims' throats. Their true feeding apparatus remains folded beneath the tongue and inside the throat. When a strigoi detects prey, it opens its jaw far beyond what human anatomy would allow and projects forward a muscular organ resembling a proboscis. This structure can reach almost 2 meters in length. Its forked tip pierces the skin, locates an artery, and begins extracting blood. At the same time, it introduces worms into the victim's circulatory system. That is why feeding and reproduction occur during the same attack in these creatures. The second means of transmission is direct contact with the worms. When a strigoi is wounded, decapitated, or mutilated, its white blood spills out and the parasites begin abandoning the corpse. They are extremely thin, move quickly, and can pass through a tiny wound or burrow directly beneath the skin. Once one of them reaches the bloodstream, the process has already begun. In the television series, ultraviolet light makes it possible to see them moving beneath the skin. In one of the first cases, a man receives nothing more than a scratch on his face, and the worm appears to be removed almost immediately. However, shortly afterwards, they discover that the infection has already spread throughout his entire body. This happens because the parasite does not need to travel to every organ by itself. As soon as it reaches the blood, it begins multiplying and distributes new copies throughout the body. It does not appear to lay eggs, as everything indicates that it reproduces asexually through division and regeneration. Even a worm cut in half can reconstruct both halves until they become 2 complete organisms. Therefore, the most likely explanation is that, once inside the body, it begins to fragment. During the first few hours, the symptoms can be mistaken for those of a serious illness. The victim develops a fever, weakness, disorientation, and increasing sensitivity to light. The immune system attempts to defend itself by raising the body's temperature and keeping the organs functioning. But the worms do not merely survive inside the host. They use its tissues to construct something new. As a result, the heartbeat becomes irregular, breathing begins to weaken, and the person eventually enters a catatonic state almost indistinguishable from death. This phase allows the infection to progress undetected. Doctors stop treating the patient, The body is transferred to the morgue, returned to the family, or prepared for burial, while the colony of worms continues spreading without interruption. In this way, the first modifications to the body are intended to ensure that the new organism can feed. The muscles of the neck, the throat, and the tissues beneath the tongue begin to form the stinger. Once this structure becomes functional, the body reactivates. The newly awakened creature is not yet a mature strigoi. It retains much of its human appearance, and its movements may seem clumsy, slow, or uncoordinated. Even so, it can already attack, and every attack can produce more infected people. However, the main modifications take place over approximately 7 nights. During that period, the human organism is simplified to adapt to a diet composed exclusively of blood. The stomach, intestines, and other digestive organs are no longer required to process solid food. They gradually atrophy or transform into a series of sacs intended to receive, filter, and store the liquid extracted from victims. In this way, the digestive and circulatory systems eventually function almost as a single structure. As I mentioned earlier, human blood also begins to disappear. The red blood cells, plasma, and platelets are replaced by a thick, whitish substance known as the white. This fluid distributes nutrients, transports the worms, and keeps the modified tissues active. That is why when a strigoi is wounded, it does not bleed red like a human. Instead, this milky liquid filled with parasites flows from its body. The heart may remain, but it no longer works in the usual way. The circulatory system is simplified and comes to depend on the combined activity of the transformed organs and the worm colony itself. This allows the body to continue moving after suffering injuries that would immediately kill a human. Even driving a wooden stake through the heart does not guarantee that the creature will die, because its organism no longer depends entirely on that organ. During that first week, other features that are no longer useful also disappear. The hair falls out, human fingernails are replaced by claws, the middle finger lengthens, and the reproductive organs atrophy because strigoi do not reproduce sexually. That is why male and female bodies gradually acquire an increasingly similar appearance. To the colony, the host's sex no longer matters. It only needs a vessel capable of feeding, moving, and spreading the infection. Although the most important changes occur during the first 7 days, complete maturation may take approximately 1 month. During that time, the movements become more precise, the senses finish adapting, and the human appearance continues to disappear. In the novels, this process is even more extreme. Mature strigoi lose their external ears, part of the nose, and many of the features that once made them recognizable. The head becomes smooth, pale, and almost completely uniform. The television series retains some facial features so that the characters remain identifiable, but it still shows the neck muscles increasing in size, the jaw becoming deformed, and the eyes developing a black pupil surrounded by a reddish hue. When they attack, once the stinger pierces an artery, the blood travels into the strigoi's internal cavities and can drain a person in a very short time. That is why, after feeding, the skin may temporarily take on a pinkish color, revealing the victim's blood moving through the creature's body. Unlike traditional vampires, strigoi are not cold corpses either. In the TV series, for example, their body temperature can reach approximately 49 degrees Celsius. In a human being, a temperature just above 40 degrees can already cause seizures, brain damage, and organ failure. However, strigoi anatomy is adapted to function under completely different conditions. The movement of the worm colony through the tissues, the processing of blood, and the constant repair of damage produce this excessive heat. At times, the temperature is so high that it can be felt without touching the creature. Rain can even evaporate when it falls on their skin. One unusual detail about these creatures is that they can feed on any blood type, but they appear to have a particular preference for B positive. This preference becomes more important when the master gains control over much of the world. People with this blood type receive better food, controlled exposure to light, and care intended to keep them healthy. They are not treated this way because the vampires value their lives. They are simply higher quality livestock. Perhaps this is because their digestive system also has an important limitation. It only works in one direction, meaning the strigoi cannot vomit or expel toxic substances after ingesting them. In the novels, the characters Fet and Satrakian exploit this weakness by using coumadin, an anticoagulant found in certain rat poisons. When the master drinks Citrachian's contaminated blood, the substance remains trapped inside his body and causes internal bleeding, poisoning, and severely weakening him. However, thanks to an ancient's superior resistance and regeneration, he manages to survive. Despite this, the strigoi do expel the waste produced by their metabolism and feeding through hot, extremely concentrated urine characterized by its powerful smell of ammonia. The novels explain that they still retain a functioning bladder and that these deposits can accumulate around their nests, leaving a trail that allows Fett and the other survivors to detect their presence. Vasily Fett, who worked as an exterminator before the epidemic, quickly recognizes that these creatures behave in a way similar to a colony of rats. They seek protected shelters, follow repeated routes, remain close to constant sources of food, and leave marks that reveal their territory. The comparison is quite accurate. For this reason, despite their supernatural origin, the strigoi can also be analyzed as an invasive species. They form colonies, protect their nests, and continue expanding for as long as enough hosts remain available. Another defining difference is that they do not need to sleep like humans. They can enter a form of lethargy after consuming too much blood, but they do not depend on a normal sleep cycle. Their activity is determined mainly by light, so during the day they seek enclosed shelters where they can remain active without being exposed to the sun. Finding a nest in broad daylight does not mean finding defenseless vampires. Inside basements, tunnels, sewers, and sealed buildings, they remain conscious and prepared to attack. Their senses also change during maturation. Conventional vision begins to deteriorate, colors lose their intensity, and fine details become less important. In exchange, living beings stand out within the environment through their heat and the movement of their blood. The television series represents this perception in a way similar to thermal vision. To a strigoi, the human body does not appear as a simple silhouette. Areas where the arteries lie close to the surface, such as the neck and face, are especially visible. However, sight is not their most important sense. Their hearing improves considerably. Because of this, they can hear a pulse, detect changes in breathing, and locate almost imperceptible movements. The television series also suggests that they can track the carbon dioxide humans release when exhaling. In addition, the infection increases strength, endurance, and tolerance to pain. The muscles can continue functioning after sustaining severe damage, meaning an ordinary strigoi is capable of throwing a person against a wall, breaking bones, and continuing to attack after being shot several times. Their wounds close rapidly thanks to the white. Cuts stop bleeding, tissues join back together, and the colony can partially stabilize damaged bones. However, this regeneration has limits. They cannot regrow a lost limb. If they lose a hand, an arm, or a leg, the wound may close, but the amputated part does not grow back. They can also die if the brain is destroyed, if the neck sustains sufficiently severe trauma, or if the head is completely severed. The problem is that the worms can survive outside the body, and the white blood can still infect another person. That is why fighting a strigoi at close range is so dangerous. Even wounding or killing one can expose someone to the parasites. And as if that were not enough, the species' true power emerges when thousands of them act as parts of a single mind. All infected individuals produced by the same strain remain connected to the ancient that originated them. Through this network, they can transmit images, sounds, memories, and orders across great distances. The master can observe the world through the eyes of any of his descendants. If one discovers a hiding place, recognizes a person, or finds an entrance, the information immediately returns to the hive. This connection also allows their behavior to be controlled. Most of them progressively lose their individuality. Their thoughts are drowned beneath an accumulation of voices and impulses that the novels describe as a chorus. At this point, they still retain fragments of memory, but those memories no longer belong entirely to them, and the colony can use them. After transforming, many strigoi feel compelled to find the people they loved when they were human. At first glance, it might appear that part of the original person still remains inside the body, but the reality is far more cruel. The infection turns affection into another mechanism of transmission. The strigoi remembers where its family lives, who might open the door, and what words it must use to persuade someone to come closer. They seek out their children, partners, or parents because these are the easiest targets to locate and because the infection interprets their blood ties as something that must still be incorporated into the colony. That is why in the television series Kelly pursues Zach. She knows his voice, his insecurities, and the phrases capable of making him lower his guard. But the need she feels is no longer a mother's love. It is the compulsion to spread the strain towards the blood most closely related to her own. They also exploit the hope of those who still recognize the face of a relative. For a few seconds, these people may hesitate, believing there is a way to restore them or that some part of their consciousness is still fighting within. And that hesitation is usually enough for the stinger to reach the throat. Although most infected people are eventually reduced to basic impulses, some retain far greater intelligence. Eichhorst is the best example. He can speak, plan, negotiate, and operate within human society. He uses makeup, prosthetics, and contact lenses to conceal his condition. But retaining his intelligence does not mean retaining his freedom. The master allows him to use his knowledge because an agent capable of infiltrating organizations, arranging transport, and manipulating institutions is far more valuable than a creature that only knows how to attack. The same applies to Kelly. Her memory and ability to communicate are useful because they make it possible to emotionally exploit Ephraim and Zach. For that reason, these stragoi are no more human than the others. They simply retain tools that the Hive still considers necessary. In the novels, older vampires lose much of their ability to speak conventionally because the stinger and the modifications to the throat destroy the structures required to produce words. Some repeat simple sounds or names associated with their memories. The oldest can project their voices directly into a person's mind and even move their lips while transmitting the message telepathically, creating the illusion of a normal conversation. The television series, however, allows Eichhorst, Kelly, and other agents to speak aloud, simplifying their interactions with the human characters. As mentioned earlier, the master possesses even more developed mental abilities. He can speak through his progeny, see through their eyes, and project images intended to manipulate a victim. In the television series, he even appears before Zach in the form of his mother, altering what the boy perceives without physically changing shape. The ancients can also use a psychic discharge known as the murmur, capable of disorienting, paralyzing, or rendering nearby humans unconscious. These abilities do not belong to every stragoi, but to the creatures at the top of the hive. The most common form of these creatures is the ordinary stragoi, a human infected through the stinger or through contact with a worm. It possesses superior strength, retains some memories, and remains connected to the strain that produced it. Next are intelligent agents such as Eichhorst and Kelly. There are also the feelers, known as the explorers in the novels. In the television series, they are blind children transformed through a special process involving soil from the master's coffin. After emerging, they develop extraordinary speed and a form of perception that does not depend on sight. They are small, silent, and capable of moving through spaces where an adult stragoi would struggle. Kelly acts as a kind of mother to them and uses them to track Zach and other members of the resistance. But Quinlan is a far stranger exception. He was not transformed after birth. His mother was attacked by the master while she was pregnant, and the infection reached the fetus before she managed to escape. As a result, Quinlan developed from the beginning with both human and strigoi characteristics. That is why he is known as the Born. He does not possess the same parasitic infection or the same relationship with the worms that characterizes ordinary strigoi. He retains free will, can withstand sunlight for longer, and possesses greater strength, speed, and longevity than a normal infected person. Although he remains connected to the master in some way, the master can't control him mentally. Finally, at the very top of the hierarchy are the 7 ancients. Each one is the original source of a different strain and controls only the vampires created by its own worms. A stragoi belonging to the master cannot be controlled by another ancient. They possess strength, speed, and endurance far greater than those of any ordinary infected person. They can also abandon a body that has become too badly damaged and transfer their consciousness into a new host. Therefore, the organism we see is not truly the ancient itself, but merely the vessel it is using at that moment. The television series represents their consciousness through a special crimson worm, As long as that parasite survives, the ancient can continue existing inside another body. In the novels, by contrast, the identity is distributed more broadly throughout the colony, but the principle remains the same. So how can these creatures be killed permanently and safely? The stragoi's primary weakness is ultraviolet radiation. When a vampire is exposed to sunlight, its skin begins to burn, the white loses its regenerative properties, and the worms die. An ordinary stragoi can be destroyed quickly under direct sunlight. That is why the survivors use UVC lamps. They use this particular type because ultraviolet radiation is divided into UVA, UVB, and UVC. UVA is emitted by black lights in many commercial lamps. UVB causes a large proportion of sunburn. UVC, by contrast, has the shortest wavelength and the greatest germicidal capacity. For this reason, in the real world, it is used to damage the genetic material of bacteria, fungi, and viruses. That is why it is far more effective against stragoi than an ordinary black light, which emits mainly UVA. However, UVC has little penetrating power and loses intensity with distance. Therefore, the protagonist must aim it directly and maintain the exposure, while clothing, obstacles, or areas in shadow can partially protect the vampire. In addition, these lamps can also cause burns and eye injuries in humans. Their second major weakness is silver. When this metal comes into contact with infected tissue, it causes a toxic reaction. Regeneration stops, and the worms begin to die around the wound. That is why Satrakian uses a silver sword. Conventional bullets can slow a stragoi down. Silver, by contrast, prevents the body from recovering properly. Antique mirrors also exploit this reaction. Contrary to popular tradition, stragoi do produce reflections. However, mirrors manufactured with a silver backing show their image as distorted and trembling. In other words, silver reveals the infection. Crosses, garlic, and holy water, by contrast, have no special effect. In the novels, stragoi also have difficulty crossing running water without assistance. They must be transported inside a container or carried by a human. This is one of the reasons the Master crosses the ocean concealed inside his coffin. The television series places less importance on this limitation and focuses primarily on light, silver, and biological explanations. That said, killing an ancient is much more complicated. In the television series, both the body and the crimson worm that preserves its consciousness must be destroyed. If the parasite manages to escape, it can enter another host. In the novels, there is an additional condition. Every ancient remains connected to the place where its strain originated. As long as that site remains intact, the source of the bloodline can survive. However, the locations of these places are hidden inside the Occido Lumen, a manuscript constructed from ancient Mesopotamian tablets. The book is protected by silver plates, and part of its contents can only be read under direct sunlight. Basically, it was designed to prevent a vampire from handling it or discovering its secrets. Up to this point, the transformation could be interpreted as the result of an unknown parasite. The worms reproduce, alter cells, modify organs, and adapt the body to produce new hosts. But the infection did not arise through natural evolution. According to the Occido Lumen, everything began during the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. God sent several archangels to observe the cities and carry out his punishment. One of them was Oziriel, the angel of death. Oziriel was an asexual being, completely hairless and perfectly proportioned. He did not need to eat, reproduce, or satisfy any of the needs associated with a mortal organism. However, during his time among humans, he began to feel curious about blood. He could hear it moving through the arteries, perceive the heat it produced, and understand that it carried a small part of the divine force with which life had been created. Eventually, he decided to taste it. Disguised as a human, he attacked a woman from Sodom and drank her blood. The experience awakened within him a need that no angel was supposed to possess. Oziriel discovered hunger, but not a hunger required to remain alive. It was an addiction based on absorbing the existence of another creature. Even after the cities were destroyed, his thirst continued to grow. Oziriel attacked one of his own brothers and attempted to drink his silver blood. As punishment, a column of divine light pinned him against the earth. His body was then divided into 7 parts, and the fragments were buried in different regions of the planet. But his celestial flesh did not decay. The blood remained alive beneath the ground and began producing small white organisms that carried fragments of his consciousness. These were the first worms. Each part of Oziriel's body gave rise to a different colony. When the parasites managed to find human hosts, the 7 ancients were born. This explains why mature stragoi lose their hair, genitals, and many of their facial features. The infection reconstructs their bodies in the image of the entity from which it originated. It also explains the relationship between their weaknesses and the archangel's fall. Light recalls the divine punishment that immobilized him. Silver resembles the angelic blood he attempted to drink, and water is connected to the place where he was condemned. At the same time, the television series offers biological explanations. Ultraviolet radiation destroys the parasitic material, and silver possesses antimicrobial properties capable of damaging the infection. Both interpretations can coexist. The behavior of the strigoi is biological, but that biology was born from celestial corruption. The Master was the last of the ancients to manifest, and his strain originated from Oziriel's throat, the same throat that was used to drink human blood and attempted to swallow the blood of his brother. That is why he inherited the thirst, ambition, and desire to spread with greater intensity. The other ancients maintained a limited population of vampires. They understood that transforming too many people could exhaust their food supply and expose their existence. The Master did not want to remain hidden. His objective was to produce enough strigoi to conquer the planet, destroy the other ancients, and turn the human population into a controlled reserve of blood. Even so, when he finally gains control over much of the world, he does not transform every human being, because doing so would leave the vampires without food. However, during Night Zero, he eliminates a considerable portion of the population. Political leaders, business people, intellectuals, and anyone capable of organizing resistance are swiftly executed. The elderly and the sick are also discarded because they are of no use to the new system. The most obedient survivors continue working. Some collaborate as police officers, administrators, and guards. Others are sent to facilities where their blood is regularly extracted. The Master preserves electricity, transport, and supply chains because routine makes obedience easier. Once the new order is established, people return to work. They receive rations, they watch old television programs. Civilization appears to continue, but humanity no longer occupies the top of the food chain. It now lives inside a farm, and that is the strain's final result. Not a city filled with uncontrolled monsters, but a system in which every strigoi and every human fulfills a role inside an organism directed by a single consciousness. And this brings us to the final question. Are these creatures truly immortal? Strigoi can exist for an extremely long time. They do not age like humans. They regenerate much of the damage they suffer, and they keep their bodies active as long as they continue feeding. And as the story has already established, the ancients can abandon deteriorated hosts and transfer their consciousness into new vessels. But none of them is completely indestructible. They all depend on a specific structure. Ordinary infected individuals depend on their brain, the white, and the colony. The ancients depend on the parasites that carry their consciousness and, in the novels, on the site where their strain was born. That is why the Master can only be permanently eliminated when his black site is destroyed, the place where the angelic fragment was buried and gave rise to the ancient. In the novels, his death also causes the disappearance of the strigoi connected to his bloodline. In the television series, the remaining infected lose the intelligence that organized the hive, but they do not die immediately. They become wild predators that must still be hunted. So these are the Strigoi of the Strain, vampires born from the blood of an archangel, spread like an infection, and organized as parts of a hive mind. Creatures capable of turning love into a means of reproduction, family into a list of targets, and immortality into the complete disappearance of human identity. And with that, we've reached the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell to stay up to date with all my new videos. I also want to give a special shout out to the channel members. Thanks to you and all of our viewers, we can keep diving into these kinds of disturbing and thought-provoking stories. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. And if you want to support the channel and get access to exclusive content, early videos, and other perks, I invite you to become a member. Just click the join button below this video. See you in the next one. Hey, don't go just yet. If you enjoyed this video, I've got another one I think you'll love. Check it out.